Good morning, everybody. Hope you had a great weekend. Today we are in Exodus chapter 23, and there's a lot I want to talk about in this chapter, so I'm just going to jump right into it. The first is some verses that talk about integrity and justice. Let's start in verse 1, if you will, of chapter 23. He says, "You shall not bear a false report. Do not join your hand with a wicked man to be a malicious witness." In other words, tell the truth. Don't lie in a report, like in court or a briefing or whatever. And he said, and don't join. Somebody's got a scheme to defraud someone to whatever, but it involves lying. Don't join in with that person's lies against an innocent person. Don't do it, he says. In verse 2, you shall not follow the masses in doing evil, nor shall you testify in a dispute so as to turn aside after a multitude in order to pervert justice. In other words, don't participate in mob rule. If you know the truth, and over here's the majority of people, and they're wrong, but there's all this rush, all this power, all this push to join with them, but they're wrong, and what they're saying is not true. Don't lie to be part of that group. And if it means you have to stand against the group, you stand against the group. You stand for the truth. You don't lie. Drop down to verse 6. You shall not pervert the justice due to your needy brother in his dispute. Don't lie and pervert justice, whether it's in favor of the poor or against the poor. Just tell the truth. Don't partner with others to either take advantage of the poor or to let the poor off when the poor did something wrong. Just be honest. Tell the truth. Look at verse 7. He said, keep far from false charge and do not kill the innocent or the righteous, for I will not acquit the guilty. Don't ever go along with a false charge, with something that's not true. If you go along with a lie and it injures somebody, God holds you accountable, he says. And then also verse 8, he says, you shall not take a bribe, for a bribe blinds the clear-sighted and subverts the cause of the just. Just be honest. Don't take a bribe and distort the truth in any way. So justice and integrity. Another topic that's addressed in this chapter, and by the way, chapter 23 is this list of instructions and legal code and so on God gave Moses for the Hebrew people that started in the previous two chapters and it's continuing here in chapter 23. But he also talks about doing good to other people, including our enemies. Back up at the beginning in verse 4. He says, if you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey wandering away, you shall surely return it. So you're out walking and growing up on the farm in Kentucky, sometimes a horse would get out or cows would get out. And he said, if it's your enemy's horse or cow, your enemy's donkey or whatever, what do? If you're a godly person, you take it and take it back to the rightful owner, even if that owner is your enemy. You do good. And verse 5, if you see the donkey or the one who hates you lying helpless under its load, you shall refrain from leaving it to him. You shall surely release it with him. In other words, if you see your enemy's livestock in trouble, what do? You rescue them. You don't just keep walking and let them die. Dropping down to verse 9. You shall not oppress a stranger. We talked about this previously in one of these chapters. Since you yourselves know the feelings of a stranger. For you were also strangers in the land of Egypt. You know what it's like to be one. So remember that and treat people well, including immigrants. All right. The third topic is one you may not have read about previously. Called the Land Sabbath, or the Sabbath of the land every seventh year, down in verses 10 and 11 of chapter 23, verses 10 and 11. He says, you shall sow your land for 6 years and gather in its yield. But on the seventh year, you shall let it rest and lie fallow. so that the needy of your people may eat. And whatever they leave, the beasts of the field may eat. You are to do the same with your vineyard and your olive grove. So you have this land, you grow crops and harvest them for 6 years. On the 7th year, you don't plant anything. You let the land rest. It also helps the needy. Why? Because some of that crop is just going to naturally grow back on its own that 7th year. You don't harvest that. You leave that for the needy. It was one of their ways of having welfare, taking care of the poor. And you let the land rest for a year, and then in the 8th year, you start the 7-year cycle over again. So here's the question. Did the Hebrew people actually do this? Once they are in the promised land, did they actually practice what God told them to practice here? I would answer it this way. On a very limited scale, some of them did. The majority did not. Some did. And some on a very limited scale. Some came up with the practice of, so if they owned, let's say, 7 acres, just to have an easy number to work with, since it's 7 years. Each year they would cultivate and harvest 6 acres and leave 1 acre uncultivated. The following year, 6 acres, and the one they had left uncultivated the year before, they would cultivate and they leave another one uncultivated. And so through that 7-year cycle, every acre was left to rest every 7th year. That was one way some of them did it. So some of them, they never took a full year of not cultivating anything, which is what God's intention really was. But they were kind of getting at it a little bit, you could say. Later in the Bible, when you get over to the book of Leviticus, chapter 26, he talks about that if you don't obey God and let the land rest, the land will expel you. And during your captivity, the land will rest. In 2 Chronicles 36, God makes it clear that during the Babylonian captivity, the 70 years of captivity, the land was going to rest because in the centuries before that, they had not allowed it to rest the way God had instructed them to do. Over the centuries, and this is non-biblical literature, this is Jewish rabbi literature and so on, some of the rabbis and others came up with the idea that a devout Jew could sell or lease his land to a Gentile for 2 years, and the Gentile would cultivate it and therefore pay the Jew, but the Jew, you could say, was letting the land rest, and then after that 2 years, he got his land back. You remember in the New Testament, in the Gospels, Jesus talking about how the Pharisees came up with all these rules that got around strict obedience to what the Scripture says, and Jesus condemned them for that. That's sort of what they were doing with this Land Sabbath. And here's the point. In this, God makes it clear in this chapter that he's going to send his angel before the Hebrew people on their way to the promised land, that God will generate fear in the hearts of those inhabitants, and that gradually, not all at once, but gradually over time, God will remove from the promised land its current inhabitants and give the land to the Jewish people. And every 7th year, they are to let the land rest because it's God's land. He gave it to them. Just like we have he gave them the Sabbath, and we worship on the Lord's Day every 7 days. Every 7 years, the land was to rest, and they were to obey God. And he says in this chapter, don't compromise with the inhabitants of the land. Don't keep any of their religious practices, their idols, nothing, their shrines. Get rid of all of it. Don't compromise with them. And he says, if you do that, then your boundaries are going to be very large. He says in chapter 23, at the end of the chapter, starting at verse 31, I will fix your boundaries from the Red Sea, that's to the south, to the Sea of the Philistines, that's the Mediterranean, up to the west. And from the wilderness, that's the north, to the river Euphrates, that's to the east. For I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you will drive them out before you. But you shall make no covenant with them or with their gods. They shall not live in your land, because they will make you sin against me, God says. For if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare, a trap to you. Question: did the nation of Israel ever have its borders as large as described in verse 31? The answer is no. The answer is no. Their kingdom was never as large as it could have been. Why? Because they never fully obeyed the command of God when it came to these idols and pagan religions. See, just like they were coming with all these ways to get around the Sabbath rest of the land, and the Pharisees in the Gospels, Jesus talked about how they got around the commandment to take care of you parents. Finding ways, looking for ways to not really obey God doesn't work. It just does not work. Shortcuts. There are no shortcuts to obedience. There are no shortcuts to obedience. Anyway, that's my takeaway from this chapter. I'll see you tomorrow as we look at Exodus chapter 24. God bless you, everybody. Have a good day.